I haven't actually checked. I think I said at the start, there are two people who sort of said they were going to do their course by distance. I haven't got around to writing to them, seeing, are you actually out there? I don't suppose, have any of you been in touch with anyone? No. I really should get in touch with them. Okay. Yeah, so, let me just redo that very, very quickly. So we're on chapter 5, resource, DTC and resource efficiency, where DTC is directed technological change. And we're just going to start, I've actually talked about a lot of this already. So we're going to take this quite quickly. We're just going to start by thinking about production functions. So this is, the top one is just some general production function with labor and resources. Remember, we've decided to ignore capital. If you want to think about capital, you think about it as bundled up together with labor. And that's the top one is general, this one is convoluted. But with this kind of formulation, we just can't capture the effects of directed technological change capital. Because whether we raise AL or AR, the effect is the same, it just raises overall productivity. And you might say, well, if that's how the economy works, well then, we should go with that. But if we look at individual firms, we can see straight away that's not how the economy works. And we want, and this goes right back to the first lecture, we want to build our aggregate macro model on micro foundations that make sense. Yeah. So we want a firm level production function that makes sense, and then build up the macro picture from having lots of those firms. So this is then ruled out because it makes no sense at the firm level. I thought you might be asking a question. Sorry. I was just trying to explain why I suddenly was stumbling. Right, I lost where I was. Yeah. Because if we think of an individual firm, like a cake making firm, if you raise, well, no, the cake example is not a good one, but if you have a firm using a lot of energy, and if you raise energy efficiency of the process to make hammers, then you'd expect less energy to be used for the given number of hammers. But that's not what you get if you assume convergence, but you get it out of this, for instance. But even better than this is this. So what's that bottom one called?
Constant elasticity of substitution.
Right. We generally just say a CES. Some people say CES, but I really don't like that. CES is like sewage. A cesspit, for instance, is a pit you put sewage in. No, not CES. CES. But
I guess it depends on what you think about the model.
I guess. Anyway. So this is CES, and the nice thing about this is we can capture all sorts of different cases just by changing this epsilon. If epsilon is 1, what do we have then? Does anybody have any cash on them? I don't.
10%, nej.
Nej.
Jag har ju en gammal sedel.
Ja, men det räcker.
Och 10% ränta på
Okay,
det.
no, that's not gonna happen.
Okej.
Okay. Thank you. A 10 crown and a 5 crown coin. Are these perfect substitutes? Okay, I want everybody to think about that. We haven't done this, right? Are they perfect substitutes? Just think about that. Chat to your neighbour, whatever.
Nej. Jaha, ja precis.
I och för sig.
Ja, absolut.
Det går också.
Det är ju okej.
Det går ju, det gör
Precis. Okej. Att pengar är... Du kan inte ha det som exempel.
det är, man har ingen preferens mellan 10 eller 5 om man har
Mm.
Nej, precis. Å andra sidan så har man ju egentligen en preferens om du får en 1000 blir 20 eller en 2500.
Okej,
Men de är ganska
men
bra.
det är ganska likt.
Men det skulle ju ändå föra
Ja,
2
absolut.
500.
Absolut. Ingen vill ha 1001 kronor heller.
Precis.
But an economist.
Even with one of each.
If I said like this, they are perfect substitutes. To an economist, I don't know if you heard what I was saying. To the man in the street, obviously, or the person in the street, of course, you would say, well, no, that's not a good substitute. You know, I'll have the 10 thanks. But according to the economic definition of perfect substitutes, they are perfect substitutes. Okay. How come? Think about that. Or does anyone have any thoughts? Let's do it this way instead, yeah. How could they possibly ever be perfect substitutes? Okay, yeah. So that's a sort of very, yeah, that's not really, yeah, that's not really saying much, is it? I mean, in the cake making process, to some extent, you might be able to substitute one egg by one machine. If the machine meant that if without the machine 1 in 100 eggs gets broken and lost, and then with the machine they're not. But that's only saying, then, okay, so they're sort of perfect substitutes in some way, because you can substitute one for the other and get the same. But that's just telling you about a sort of point estimate, what's happening in exactly that situation. We want to say something very, very general about what it means in general for two inputs to be perfect substitutes. So, if we go to look at this bottom line, what value of epsilon would give us perfect substitutes? I'm going to drop the gammas because I want to save ink. So let's say we've got ALL to the epsilon plus okay. So what value of epsilon would give us perfect substitutes? Have a think. Well, give me some thoughts. Whatever. Yeah, I'm saying straightforward the answer. 1. What do the rest of you think about that?
Sounds good.
So what do we then have? We just have y is ALL plus ARR. Okay. So what if y is the amount of money we've got? And L is the number of 5 crown coins we've got, and R is the number of 10 crown coins we've got. Then what's AL? So L is the number of 5 crown coins we've got.
Mm-hmm.
So AL is, right, I wanted a number. And AR is that. And epsilon is 1. And are the inputs perfect substitutes? Yeah. The point is, when epsilon is 1, the inputs are perfect substitutes, whatever the values of AL and AR. So how do we actually define that? The point is, with perfect substitutes, that the relative marginal products of the inputs the relative prices, if we're going to assume perfect markets and so on, are not affected by the relative quantities. Okay. So with coins it's a little bit distracting because you might say, look, I've already got a load of 5s, I want some 10s. But if you think of sort of 100 crown notes and 50 crown notes, and it's like, you know, how much is a 100 crown note worth? It's always worth 100 crowns, even if you've got loads of them and hardly any 50s. Okay. So that's the point with perfect substitutes, that the relative quantities of the inputs doesn't affect their relative prices. And that is, of course, the case with money. Okay, so that's epsilon equals 1. Turns out there's a thing called L'Hopital's rule that means if epsilon is 0, we end up with Cobb-Douglas. What about, so epsilon is 0, it's kind of not defined, is it? But it turns out it actually is with some tricky maths, which we're not going to go through. But that gives you Cobb-Douglas. You've got something to the 0 to the power of infinity. It's like, whoa. What about when epsilon goes to minus infinity? Turns out that's Leontief. Okay. The limiting case when epsilon goes to minus infinity is Leontief. So when epsilon is negative, the inputs are poorly substitutable. They're highly complementary to each other, not very substitutable. When epsilon is positive, they're highly substitutable, not very strongly complementary. Okay. We're going to look more at this. So what, actually I think we're going to come to this. Why not Cobb-Douglas? We've done that. Think of making hammers from steel. Leontief actually makes a lot of sense, yeah? As an extreme, if you're going to choose an extreme case. But actually, why don't we just go with CES and then we can choose epsilon and we can have Leontief if we want later. So what values are possible? Generally between 1 and minus infinity. Okay. If it's bigger than 1, then that's kind of weird for a production function. It's super weird. But any of these values make sense. Special cases, Leontief, Cobb-Douglas, perfect substitutes. And basically from here through to here, you've got an increasing degree of substitutability and a decreasing degree of complementarity. Okay. Right. Now, in the next 10 minutes, we're going to look at this. These two slides. So, have a read of that. Okay, has everyone read it? So there's trees washing up on the beach. 10 wash up each week. And the islanders have got knives which allow them to cut the trees into planks which can then rapidly be made into houses. So the key step in house building is cutting up the trees to make the planks. Okay, we can ignore the time spent on putting the planks up together to make a house. Which to me kind of makes sense. Okay, it's going to take a while, isn't it? To make these planks. They're not like the lightsabers, these knives, they're just knives. And they make a house every 100 weeks. Okay. What do they need more of to boost their rate of house building? Give me a suggestion for epsilon and the knowledge levels. Think about it. Talk to your neighbour. And yeah, we've dropped the gammas, okay, so it's this. This is the equation. So we're ignoring capital, so they've got the knives. Bra. Helt rätt. Vi är på rätt väg.
Men vad sa du?
Det är härligt.
Alltså, det beror på, ja men det framgår inte riktigt om de är konsensus världen. Och med det
So they want to make, sorry?
Och det är väl kanske där som själva
There's 10 trees a week. They're making one house every 100 weeks. So how many trees is that? That's 10. That's 1,000 trees. Right.
Fast de kan inte bygga fler om
So
de
you
inte
think
får
the
fler
trees
människor.
wouldn't be the
Kanske
issue?
de inte kan bygga fler.
Det känns som om de sitter då typ, om de veckorna liksom sitter de och typ 16 timmar fritid för att de inte har tid.
Right,
De inte
potentially, yeah.
gått upp.
But at the moment I'm
Det står ju
thinking more
inte
like
hur sysselsatta de är. Det står bara hur många.
okay. I'm based, at this point I think I'm thinking, which is what Janine is saying, they're going to need more people. If we're just thinking in a very narrow sense, okay, they're making one house every 100 weeks, they've got this overflow of trees, they want to raise their rate of house building, they're going to have to have more people. So somehow, because the point really is that the limiting thing in the production function is this and not this. Okay. But raising this isn't going to help. Okay. So that's basically the intuition I want to get. It could be this or this that goes up actually, labour productivity or the number of people. But raising tree productivity or the number of trees isn't going to help. Okay. What about an elasticity of substitution? Well, no. Okay, what about the knowledge levels? So remember we talked about production functions. Oh, okay, wow. If there's something that is, there's so much of it, it's like it's free. What do you do with it in a production function? Drop it. Yes. You guys are on form today. You're like, yeah, you're getting onto my wavelength maybe. Yeah, excellent. So if we just drop this, what would we have? We'd have y is ALL to the epsilon to the 1 over epsilon. So then we just have y is ALL, wouldn't we? And we've got a number for y. What's that? 0.01, yeah? Houses per week. And we've got a number for L. What's that? 10 workers. So what's AL? Well, you can all do the math, right? It's going to be 0.001 houses per worker per week, which sounds very much like a labour productivity, doesn't it? 0.001 houses per worker per week times 10 workers, 0.01 houses per week. So AL should be that. Okay. What about epsilon? What is a good value for epsilon? Now, this is much less clear cut. What about epsilon equals 1? Would that make sense?
No. They're poor substitutes.
They're poor substitutes, yeah.
It should be negative.
It should be negative.
Maybe much negative.
And we're kind of economists, so we want to make life easy for ourselves. So what value do we choose for epsilon? We get -1, okay. But the key thing is here to say, yeah, negative, good. Did I set this going? Yeah, I think I did. Yeah, I did. After near full. Yeah. So epsilon should be negative, and then the sort of, the crib sheet says, just make it -1 to make it easy. Okie doke. And what about AR then? So imagine that you actually, that this was huge and that this was limiting. Okay. Then we'd have this, wouldn't we? So imagine you have some fantastic technology that meant that actually, given the labour force, we could easily cut up all the trees into planks. And the problem was, we need more trees. So, then what should AR be? Have a think. We'll stop after this. So we'll spend the time necessary on this. Might be another couple of minutes, if that's okay. But what we won't do the next time. So what are the units of AR? Lost my pen. What are the units of AR? And where's my pen? Never mind. Oh, here it is. So what are the units of Y? And what are the units of R? Trees per week, isn't it? So what are the units of AR? You got it, right?
I was thinking, but we need to fit in.
Oh, sorry, I thought you had
houses
it.
per tree.
Yeah, houses
Yeah.
per tree. Yeah. Well done. So, give me a number for AR. And so the idea here is a bit like earlier with, I want you actually to think about reality. Imagine these people on the island, and imagine the trees rolling up and they're cutting planks and making houses, and then give me a number for this. So don't think about math and stuff. Imagine yourself on a beach, and you somehow are able with a knife to make planks out of trees and build a house. Then think about AR and look at the units. question is like how many houses, how many trees, or if you invert it, how many trees do you need to make a house? Because we don't know what the house is like, but we can have a fair guess given the context, right? It's not going to be Buckingham Palace. So if we just make something up, like how many trees do you think you need for a house? What might be reasonable? Like 1,000? 0.01? I mean, there's no right or wrong answer, but there's some highly unreasonable and more reasonable answers, right? It sounded like you wanted to say something, Gustav.
Not yet.
Not really. There's no sort of house builders here.
100.
Seems like,
reasonable.
yeah. I would say that's an awful lot, considering this context. I mean, they're going to be huts they're making here, aren't they, kind of? But of course, I mean, you could say 100, it wouldn't really matter. Unless you went really over the top and said 1,000, but then the kind of math would all break down. The assumptions that I made wouldn't work anymore. But just to make the assumptions nice, let's just say like 10. Okay. We don't know how big the trees are either, do we? If you need 10 trees to make a house, then what's AR? It's 0.1, yeah. So then we would have AR is 0.1. And then we do get this nice result then, that ARR is 1, but ALL is 0.01, isn't it? So there's 100 times more of this than there is of this. They're poor substitutes, which means basically we're crying out for more labour in the house, and the trees are completely. Then we can do some math and assume there's a sort of perfect market for trees and labour. So there's people grab these trees as they arrive, and then there's a market for them. And there's a market for labour, and we can work out the prices of trees and labour and the factor shares, and then look at incentives to invest in this or this. And then if we've got production functions for the knowledge stock, then we can work out how the economy is going to develop over time. And that's the kind of thing that comes up quite often in exams. And then we can link it back to reality and say, okay, did we actually learn anything? Right, that's it for today. Sorry to go over time again.